Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of Broadreach Podcast. This is a podcast mostly about sailing and beyond, things beyond. But we're at the moment we're covering the Golden Globe race run by Don McIntyre, and we're massive fans of the race. And myself, I'm a big fan. Shane Power is my name, and my friend Sean McHugh here, experienced sailor. So welcome back, and we got some great thanks to everybody who gave us some great feedback from the first episode. We're delighted with the response. It was brilliant, way more than we imagined. We got lots of emails and texts from friends and family, and even some people who just happened to find us online from searching. So it's great. So welcome to episode 2. We're going to cover a few things. So I'll just pass it over to you there, Sean. You were going to go for the tracker, I think, were you?
Yeah, well, we had a kind of a catastrophic failure last week when we were trying to do the tracker, which is essentially a real-time view of where all of the competitors in this round the world race are. So I'm going to share my screen now and make sure that it's actually working. So let me know when you can see this, Shane.
Sure. Yeah, we can see that now.
Okay, so I'm going to zoom out a small bit, or maybe go a little bit to the west. I had to think about that one. So here we have New
Zealand. The fleet.
Sorry?
You want to start at the back of the fleet, or?
Yeah, so so where are we and what are we looking at, I think, is the first thing. So this is a map of the world, as you can probably see. We've got New Zealand here, North Island, South Island. We've got Tasmania, and we have Australia. And you can see we've a couple of little triangles in here. These are boats. So this is where everybody has come from. There you see a better view of Australia. You can see Elliot, who we talked about last week, is almost at Australia. We'll come back to him. And we have Guy here, who we're going to talk a little bit more about later. But he's in this kind of orange box, which is a no-go zone. In other words, competitors should not be in there when they're sailing around the world. And the reason for that is it's the weather down south is more dangerous than it is up north for this particular part of the world. So he gets penalized 3 hours for every hour that he's in this no-go area. But it's not massively relevant for him at the moment because he's already stopped in Cape Town to do some repairs on the boat. So he's now in a different class. He's not sailing solo around the world. He's sailing with one stop. So he's in what's called Chichester class. Because if you remember from last week, we talked about Francis Chichester, and he did the fastest round the world voyage back in 1976. But he did it with one stop. So that's why it's called Chichester class. So this tracker basically goes through all of the different it tracks all of the people that are left in the race. Some people have retired. They're no longer being tracked, obviously. As we move kind of towards the top of the fleet, you have Kirsten, Abhilash, and you have Simon way out in front. So I'm just going to go through some of the features of this and why we use this and what it's actually for. So it's a feature that the organizers, that Don and the organizers of the race put together with this company called Yellow Brick, and it allows us to track what's actually happening. So let's hover over Simon as an example. He's doing 6.1 knots, which is his speed. That's his position as of probably, well, it tells us, right? So 8 o'clock today, UTC, which is the same as GMT at the moment, Greenwich Mean Time. His latitude, longitude, his distance to the finish, 9,000 nautical miles. So he needs to get all the way back to France via Cape Horn, which is the southern tip of South America, up the South Atlantic, up the North Atlantic, back up to across the Bay of Biscay, back to France.
I think they're estimating it, Sean, for kind of early February, if I'm right.
Really?
Rough estimations. Would I be right there?
maybe to past Cape Horn probably at that point, no?
Yeah, maybe past Cape Horn. Yeah, that's probably makes sense.
I think it is because I heard 3 weeks earlier in the week. So you also get his distance in the last 24 hours, 152 nautical miles. So he's coming first.
Wow.
So this is a big distance. That'll become apparent as we go through this over the coming episodes. You'll get a kind of a feel for the distances. So that's kind of high level overview. Some of the features that we use here are wind and weather, and this is really, really cool. So if we toggle on the wind data, this is where it all kind of froze for me last week. So fingers crossed here that this works. It's working for me, Shane.
Yeah, that's working. Yeah, I can see that. Okay. Excellent.
All right, cool. So what is this? This is coming from Windy, and a lot of people will be familiar with Windy. Sailors, kite surfers, anyone that's fishermen, anyone that's working, fisherwomen, anyone that's working with the sea and wind will be familiar with this application. So essentially what it allows you to do is get a real-time view of the weather. It's color-coded, so you start down here with 0 knots, which is the light blue section here, and it goes up to you have 60. Like this is the kind of, as it gets towards the purple color, the wind is increasing. So Simon is in a bit of wind here. He's probably in 35, 40 knots, and it's probably gusting, probably 55. So he's in a bit of wind. He's probably in a sufficient wind that he's getting a warning from the race organizers. So normally when it's over 35 knots, they get a warning and say, look, there's weather coming and it's going to be this and it's going to last for such and such time. So that's what this is. But what also you can do is you can push the weather forward. So you start here, and we can move this forward every hour to see what the weather is going to be like. So it's so amazing and powerful.
Would you call that sailing downwind, Sean? What Simon has the wind on his back now.
Yeah.
He's sailing downwind.
Yeah, he's sailing downwind, and interestingly, not everybody else is. So if you look at this system, well, just scroll a little bit to the left. This system here is a high pressure. The reason we know it's a high pressure is because it's going anti-clockwise. If we were in the northern hemisphere and it was going anti-clockwise, it'd be a low pressure. But because we're in the southern hemisphere, everything is reversed, just like water going down the sink. So Kirsten, if we look at her position, the wind is kind of coming at the side of the boat, and we call that a beam reach. Abhilash, he's probably downwind, but they're probably getting very little. Like I suspect, we're just looking at this, without even, like, if we were to guess, I would guess Kirsten's probably doing like 2 or 3 knots, 0.6, nothing. So she's in like 0 wind, so probably even less than it's showing here. So it's likely that this kind of blank spot is maybe a little bit more to the west than it's telling us here. And Abhilash, he's doing like 4 knots, 4.4. So
can I just say there, Sean, for anybody who's new to this, Simon is the race leader, and he's had a very consistent big lead since very early in the race. And he actually hit one of these calm zones when he arrived at Tasmania, and Kirsten and Abhilash actually caught right up to him. So now he's gaining his lead again. But you can actually measure that, Sean, in a minute. You can see how far ahead he is.
Exactly. So we've got this ruler functionality up here, and this is telling us that Simon is 973 nautical miles. I don't have the calculation off the top of my head as to what that is in kilometers, but it's easy to think as nautical miles. It's slightly bigger than a mile. So we're talking over 1,000 miles in this case, which is a significant lead. 1,000 nautical miles is about a week ahead. in racing terms.
That's massive.
Yeah. Now, remember, Shane, Kirsten was within about 100 miles of Simon. So less than 100 at one stage. But the way he got out of Tasmania, which is over here, was just incredible. He just got a window, got a break in the weather, and escaped and headed over towards the southern tip of New Zealand. So look, that's kind of high level overview of the tracker. We could go on about this for hours. I'm just going to show you one other feature of this. You can also look at the currents, for example, and this is really cool. So these are the currents. I mean, like, this is amazing. These are the currents that are in the ocean, and these are how do they do this? Well, I think satellite imagery is one of the. They can read the temperature on the surface of the water and do an approximation. You can also look at this through over time, so you can push this forward. Now, they pretty much stay the same. They don't really move position quickly the way the wind does. And there's maybe one other thing.
Is that function there of looking at the currents, Sean, something that someone sailing, like, not in obviously in the Golden Globe race, they're only allowed to use pre-1968 technology, but in normal circumstances, is that a technology that someone would use when they're out on a boat?
Well, Shane, I would love to say I knew about it, but I didn't. So I've never used it, but I'm going to use it. So, like, wind usually, but I will certainly be using this. And I would suspect if we look up, like if we look at Ireland, for example, and we look at the northeast coast, Rathlin Island, I know you can have 9 knots of tide up there. And so I would suspect that the currents will be extremely strong up there. Also, I think we should maybe just show the southern tip of South Africa.
Yeah.
There's a place called Agulhas Point, and there's the very famous Agulhas Current, and you can see it here. So white, again, this is color coded. White is up to 3 knots.
Wow.
If you remember, Simon's going 6 knots approximately. 3 knots is half his speed. So if he's going with the stream, he's going 6 plus 3 is 9. If he's going against it, he's going 6 minus 3, which is 3 knots. So obviously, if we go up to, I don't know if it will very much be determined by the time of the year. But if we have spring tides in Ireland, for example, there's quite a lot. This point here, this is Rathlin Island, and you can see, okay, they've got at the moment over 3 knots, 4 knots of tide at least. You get up to 9 knots of hair at spring tide. So if you're going clockwise around past Ballycastle down towards Dublin or Belfast, and you're going 5 knots in your motorboat and the tide's coming at you 9 knots, it's impossible. You're just going to go backwards. So it actually can't be done.
And so what about if you're in a sailboat and you're going downwind at almost like the maximum speed that you should go? Like, let's say Simon is going 6.5 knots and he gets on a current that's 3 knots. Like, is he running the risk of damaging his boat by going too fast?
Very good question. So I would say it depends on the conditions, and it leads on nicely to the last piece that I want to show here, which is the waves. So if you look at this, Shane, I think you can probably see that now. Yeah, you can.
Or you can see the direction of the waves.
Exactly, and this is the swell. So this is color coded as well. So the lighter blue here is kind of 0, half a meter, 1 meter, 1.5 meters, and Simon's probably in like 3, 4, 5 meters there. Quite a big sea. So if you've got a big sea, which you will have when you've got a lot of wind, and remember we had seen quite a lot of wind at the very beginning with Simon, you can actually go, you can have too much power in your sails and you can be going too fast. And the danger is that you could you could surf down a wave and plow into the wave that's in front of you. And if that happens, you could end up, pitch poling the boat, like kind of doing a somersault in the boat, and which could be catastrophic. It could be really serious, the damage that you could do. It did happen in the previous race. in the previous GGR, actually in 2018. It happened to Jean-Luc, who went on to win the race. He managed to get away with some damage to his mast. He thought he was going to have to limp with the boat to Chile, but he managed to climb up the mast at sea on his own 5 times and do a kind of a repair on one of the, I think it was either, I'm trying to think, was it a spar? I think it was one of the spars that comes out from the top of the mast was damaged, and he managed to do a repair. I don't remember exactly the details of it, but he fixed it, sailed around the southern tip of Chile, back up the Atlantic, and won the race. So it's amazing.
And there was the in the 2018 Golden Globe race, we had Abalash and the Irish entry Gregor McGuckin. They both had a rough time. Abalash, we know there was a massive rescue operation to save him. He ended up like crippled on his boat. Thank God he's okay, and he's back in this race now. But there's a term, isn't there, Sean, when you're after being in a massive storm and you've taken a huge hit. When you're what's the term when you've all your sails down and you're
like if you mean if the boat's just kind of drifting, well, not drifting, but if there's too much wind and you don't want to be overpowered.
Yeah.
Probably bare poles, I guess.
Bare poles. That's the one I was trying to think of. Yeah.
That's like if you imagine, well, particularly in olden times, you nearly always would have had 2 masts, and one of the competitors, Captain Gugg, Michael Guggenberger, has a boat like that. It's a ketch, so it has 2 masts. So if you can imagine the mast without a sail, it looks like a pole. So that's what you have. You're riding on bare poles, I guess, is the term that's used.
Riding on bare poles. That's what I was trying to think of.
Yeah, and like if you're in that situation, you're in dire straits, really. But it does happen, and I mean it has happened to these guys on this race, that they've been in those situations, and in the Southern Ocean, that's bread and butter. I think that's probably enough for the tracker, Shane. Yeah. There was one little piece that I wanted to mention, maybe about Gugg, Captain Gugg. So as he was approaching here, these islands, the snares, and it was actually here. I'll just zoom in a small bit. He sent out a tweet, so the competitors can tweet live from the boat, even though they can't get real time. Remember, they can't get real time weather. They don't have GPS, so they're using like technology from 1968. So they're using sextants, which allows you to get your position by looking at the angle of the sun. And he couldn't, because there was no clear sky when he was in this position here. There's a little island here, Snares Island. He was kind of heading towards this, and he was concerned, and he said this in his tweets, look, I can't get a sighting. I've got too much cloud cover.
So he would have been dead reckoning, Sean, would he? Dead reckoning.
He would have been dead reckoning. He would have been dead reckoning, Shane. Yeah. So here's actually the cloud cover. So this is cloud, and here it's clear. So it was quite similar actually that when he was approaching, but there was a break in the clouds. He managed to get a sighting and figure out where he was, and his position was kind of. I actually might have a track of it. I do. That's his. He was heading down here, you see, this yellow line, and he was going to come the wrong side, because if you look at this, one of the rules is you need to leave those islands to starboard, so you need to pass them above it, essentially. When he got his sighting, he then adjusted, tacked or jibed, whichever it was, and went around the islands. So that's
just
pretty much
to explain to people, Sean, just to explain to anybody who's watching or listening, dead reckoning is when you take your current speed and your direction, and you're basically estimating where you're going to be after a certain amount of hours. Is that right?
Exactly. And like, it's accurate to a point, but if you think about it, your first dead reckoning, you can, let's say you're going due east. Let's say, look at Gugg here. He's going due east, and he can say, I'm going 6 knots, so in 1 hour I'll be 6 nautical miles away. You know, he can guess that, but then that first guess position is now an estimated position. When you guess again, your margin of error is increasing all the time because you don't really know where the first estimated position is. So, you know, like this could be, you could be here, you could be here, you could be slightly back, you could be slightly back. So like, let's say he thinks he's here, but he's actually here. He's now basing the next position off an incorrect starting position. So that's the problem with dead reckoning. The error accumulates, and you've got wind.
Hypothetically speaking, if you were to dead reckon for over a massive distance, just hypothetically, you said something interesting to me before, where when you're traveling across oceans, you're actually drifting the whole time.
Yes,
because of the rotation of the Earth, which is another thing to consider.
Yeah, like you've got the wind as well, which is called leeway. So I mean, if and you've got tides as well and currents. So like Gugg will definitely be, if he assumes he's going to be due east, he definitely won't be after an hour. He'll be down here because of the wind. Even though he's actually pointing the boat, he's looking at the compass. The compass says due east, and he'll be, you know, even if he's standing up manually driving the boat or even sets it on autopilot due east, it will still drift. So dead reckoning over a long period of time, eventually you're going to end up on the rocks.
Yeah.
Unless you can spot a lighthouse or something. Eventually that error, it's very likely it will accumulate and send you where you didn't expect to be. So that's why it's so important that you get a sight from the sextant, and why modern day times GPSs are so important.
Absolutely.
So that's pretty much the tracker. I think maybe we can move on to a little bit about Guy, Shane.
Yeah, sure.
So we just want to do a little bit of a profile for each of the competitors, and just share my screen here. This week we're going to talk about Guy. 1 second. Let me know when you can see this, Shane.
Yeah,
yeah,
I can see that now on my screen.
Yeah. So Guy is from Yorkshire in the UK. He's been sailing for many years. Started off crewing, sailing back and over the English Channel to France. He crewed in the Clipper Round the World race, which is like it's an amateur kind of Volvo Ocean style race on big boats. He also skippered that in 2019, 2020. So he skippered one of those boats, which is like a massive responsibility. So he has already sailed around the world and been a skipper. His boat is a Tradewind 35 foot. The boat's name is Sagar Mata. And he's in Chichester class. What does that mean? So that means, I think we mentioned it last week, Guy had a problem with barnacles. When he was coming down the North Atlantic, when he had passed Lanzarote in the Canary Islands and he was heading down towards the east coast of Brazil, not the west coast, like I said last week, Shane, the east coast of Brazil, he realized that the boat started slowing down. And he had barnacles, and he had to stop in Cape Town to clean off the barnacles. He was actually going to abandon the race, or maybe not abandon the race, but he was going to go to Uruguay, a place called Ponte del Este. And it's a place he'd been on the Clipper race as a skipper. So he knows the port, knew the marina, and had contacts there. He was going to try and go there, sort out the problem, and then consider his options. Would he continue with the race, or what would he do? But maybe after a week of sailing west, he said, no, I'm going to go for Cape Town. So he turned the boat around, started sailing east, and eventually made it to Cape Town. Now, he sailed west for a week, but he probably lost 3 weeks. So it is unfortunate, but these things happen, and they happened in the 2018 race. As I said, John Luke sailed towards Chile, ended up fixing the problem, and went on to win the race. So these things happen. But we do have some news as to how the Chichester class could become interesting, because as of, was it yesterday or the day before, Shane, Jeremy is also in Chichester class. So I think maybe you're just going to give us a little bit of a rundown as to what happened to Jeremy.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop.
Yeah, so Jeremy is he is in Hobart now, and he was struggling to land in Hobart, similar to some of the other competitors. Simon actually lost his lead there. The pressure zones around Hobart are proving to be difficult, but Jeremy has loads of barnacles on his boat, and he also had a few issues with rationing. I think he had an issue with water rationing, and he wanted some fresh food as well. So he's just decided to go into Chichester class, and basically they have his boat. I think we'll actually pull up some footage here, because the amount of barnacles on his boat is mad. I'll just share my screen here so you can see. Don't know if you can see this now.
I can. For anyone that's listened to the audio version, Shane, can you just explain what it is that we're looking at here?
Yeah, so we're just looking at
And for anyone that's looking at
it. For anyone who's not looking, this is a Golden Globe Race official video. We're using their content, and Don doesn't mind. So this is Jeremy's boat, and Don is interviewing him in front of the boat. I'll just play it here in the background while I'm talking, but it's on mute at the moment. But you can see the amount of barnacles on the boat is just, it's actually incredible. So Jeremy's boat, all of the skippers would have treated their boats with what we call anti-fouling, and I'm learning about this through the Golden Globe Race. But I know that Jeremy's boat has a particular type of anti-fouling system it's copper coated. So I believe that when he scrapes them off, they're going to do something that's called reactivating the copper. So I think it's just the properties of copper are supposed to, I think if you buff it with sandpaper, it's just the barnacles don't like it, basically. They can't really stick to it. But there's other ways of anti-fouling. I'll just pause that again now, Sean. But there's what's interesting about the Golden Globe Race is, sorry, Sean?
What's the impact on, like, why is it such a problem for Jeremy?
Oh yeah, well, the barnacles obviously, they create massive amounts of drag under the boat, so it just affects your speed completely. So it's a huge issue, and it's obviously affected Guy and Jeremy. But what's interesting is when Jeremy spoke to Don, he seemed to say it's down to luck that you might end up going through a massive cloud of barnacles. So that's really interesting, because it is terrible luck. And as you say, you know, Guy has loads of experience, but it's a little bit down to your anti-fouling. What you're going to do. You can use different types of anti-fouling paint as well. But Sean, you know a little bit about that, I think.
Yeah, like Don actually did a little, so Don does a Q&A on the GGR official YouTube channel, which is really brilliant, and would recommend that people check that out. We've talked to Don as well, and hence we're showing the videos now. But Don did a piece on the actual anti-fouling, and it's unbelievable. Like Don is actually surprised that not, like, this problem has come up before with barnacles. And Jean-Luc, the guy who won the race in 2018, he had a very specific setup, and that information was out there for everyone, but nobody copied exactly what Jean-Luc did. And like Don was really surprised by that. Like, why did people? It's a winning formula. He won the race. He didn't have barnacles. Just copy it. Okay, it might not be perfect, but it worked. So why not just copy that? So I think if I was ever doing something like this, I would just copy what I know works. But having said that, Shane, yes, there are scenarios where people have had exactly the same setup from an anti-fouling perspective, and you get these clouds of barnacles in different parts of the ocean. And I could be in one boat going east, and you could be 10 miles away, parallel to me, going east as well, and I hit a cloud of barnacles, and I'm going, I had been going 6 knots, and now I'm going 3, and you fly along at 6 knots and get to the pub before I do. So these things can happen.
It's crazy, but we spoke a little bit about it in the first episode. Like I'm reading Bernard Moitessier's book, The Long Way, at the moment. For anybody who doesn't know Bernard Moitessier, definitely look him up. He was involved with the original Golden Globe race. He's a real character. But he mentions early in his book about diving and checking for barnacles as soon as the wind dropped. So that's the other thing we should probably let people know. Like, you need to be adept at kind of free diving as well to remove them at an early stage. And I think you were making the point before, Sean, like, you've no leverage when you're underwater as well, trying to remove these things. It's really difficult. But I think that's pretty much it with the barnacles.
Yeah, like when you're in the water, if you can imagine trying to pull these barnacles off the boat, like when you're on land, you can kind of steady yourself against the ground and get a scraper. But if you're like jumping over the side of the boat and you're in the middle of the Pacific or Southern Ocean, like drifting, it's a scary thing to just start going hacking at barnacles. And you saw the amount that were on Jeremy's book. Can you imagine how disheartening that would be, seeing that and trying to solve it?
Unbelievable.
So like, just Shane, before we wrap up, I just want to throw a bit of a question at you, which you don't know is coming, but I'm going to ask you anyway. And like we've talked a little bit about last week, you kind of explained with the technology, that we don't have, or the competitors in the race don't have GPS. They don't have modern technology at all. They're using equipment and boats essentially from 1968. That means they also don't have things like iPods, CD players, record players. Record players they would have, right? But what they do for music is they have tape recorders. Okay. So I was just thinking, if you were sailing around the world, what album would you bring with you on tape? And bear in mind, you can take them. I'm not going to limit you now to 1968, because although I know that you know music from that time. But what? And for those of you that don't know me and Shane, we used to play in a band together, so I have a little bit of an inkling as to what Shane might say. But Shane, what?
Am I only allowed to bring one?
Well, you can bring as many. Give me maybe 2 or 3.
Oh my God, that is a hard one. Okay, well, I'm definitely going to bring a Bob Dylan album. Probably Desire. I just love that album. I'd probably have to bring something a bit mad, like the Mars Volta, Die Lost in the Comatorium, just because it's an epic album. I think it's one of the best albums of the last 20 years. And then maybe some jazz, maybe some Avishai Cohen or something. So I think there's a nice enough mix there for different moods, something like that. Shane, that's a great question, though.
Shane, I by the way, I don't believe it, because my number 1 album was Desire.
Really?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah,
I actually can't believe you asked me that question, because I had it written down for you. But that's brilliant.
Was it the same question we had?
Yeah.
I don't believe it.
That's amazing.
That's unbelievable. Okay, I think we leave it there for this week, Shane. We've got through a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that we didn't get through, but we'll take that next week. There's one thing we want to talk about: Mutiny on the Bounty and Captain Bligh. People are going to be wondering, why is that relevant? Well, it is relevant. It's relevant to the race. It's also relevant to Ireland and to Dublin particularly. So we'll do a little bit about that next week. We'll also, I think, we also want to maybe talk about Elliot and the charts coming into Fremantle, Shane. I know you picked up on something.
Elliot tweeted, he doesn't have the charts to Fremantle. That was about it. He was asking if someone would pilot him in. Like, he's a legend. He's coming to the end of his journey now, so hopefully we'll be able to see him on land.
Yeah, so we'll follow Elliot closely maybe next week, because we know, as you said, he's coming to the end of the journey. But I think, look, let's leave it there for today, Shane, and we'll catch everybody next week. Cheers, everyone.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.